Pinky and the Brain, Issue 14. Brain tells Pinky after time traveling to medieval England that they've legalized theater. It was never illegal. He says that by subtly weaving his message into his play, he'll become their leader. How could he be subtle in anything? How would he think they'd be so easily swayed? Why would he think they'd be impressed when he says, to brain or not to brain, and nonsensically mixes quotes? They get food thrown at them and have to run away. He somehow thinks his plan would work in the theater. This is like a parody of the series. He doesn't let Pinky say that the people here look just like the ones Brain annoyed, even though that has to be what he's going to say. He sees a chained bear in front of a dog and talks about this condescendingly in front of everyone who's bored enough to enjoy it. Pinky tries to warn him about the bear being mad at him. The bear won't know what he's saying. He gets thrown into someone and says he's a writer-actor who's written a play. For no reason, the person interrupts him and says what he would know everyone already knows. Of course, the pretentiously talking person is Shakespeare. I like that Pinky says he talks funny. Brain says he needs a director and he teams up with Brain right away, believing in some stranger's competence too easily, even though he's never heard of his writing talents before. So he wouldn't risk humiliating himself by employing him with no proof that he made a successful play before, no matter how much he'd want to humiliate Brain. Brain recites lines, the floor breaks beneath Brain's feet, and eventually he's told that he's too arrogant and they need a lady fair so that the audience will have someone to wish for. Brain says women are banned from the theater and he says he knows. And Pinky shows up dressing like a woman, calling him out on his arrogance while acting like he's reciting some lines. I really hate how this guy talks. It makes the story boring. Brain says to Pinky that he's wearing a toga to imitate Caesar. I wish he explained why he's his role model just because he's a famous leader. There were many of those. He's picking the most infamous ones. So eventually, Brain recites some lines in a play and he somehow decides to walk into the hole, which thankfully makes the audience laugh. It's smart of Pinky to whisper to him and smart of Brain to decide to continue on with the play as if nothing happened. It's so talented of them to have already memorized their lines perfectly. Brain ends up thrown out of the hole by the bear, which makes the queen laugh. Brain tells Pinky he's here to save him and calls him Pinky. This implies that he either isn't saying something from the script or forgot his name in the play. Also, where did the band-aid on his head come from? He got those band-aids the instant he was thrown by the bear. Apparently he had them in his clothes and put them on right before the bear threw him up there. Pinky says he's his wife, trying to remind him to go back to the script. Brain must still be dazed from getting hurt because he doesn't take the hint and just expresses disgust at the idea of Pinky being his wife, forgetting the script. And the queen says what she thinks is funny about it because the queen can get away with talking in the audience and annoying everyone, and she doesn't care about anyone else. Brain then annoys the queen by making a boring speech that says she made a mess without explaining what it means, and that he'd give people more food. So he and Pinky get chased out of the play by angry people. Because the queen got mad, and people would be too scared of getting in trouble with her to give a new leader a chance, even if they wanted to. And Brain was boring and came up as arrogant, so they had no reason to trust him just because he was an alternative. Brain says timing is everything, and Pinky lampshades his stupidity in insulting the queen to her face. In the next story, Brain explains that the way he figured out who the 103 most important people in the world were was through exhausting research. But how would it be exhausting? All I'd have to do is go on Wikipedia and look up every prime minister and write them down. He wants to control them to control the world. The Elvis Lives conspiracy theory gets made fun of because Pinky believes it, and Brain says it was came up with by people with too much imagination and time on their hands. He makes fun of the headlines that are so ridiculous they'd only make sense if this newspaper was really a parody, like The Onion, but then it wouldn't be put into print, it'd be online. He somehow believes the bee article actually happened, and gets the idea to control a swarm of bees to try to manipulate the interactions of those 103 people. Why 103? Why not a round number like 100? They go somewhere in the lab where nothing is as it seems. Even the wheel of cheese is rigged to explode. Why did he make it like that? to guard his bee bomber suit, it was smart of him to have night sight goggles on his bee suits. He says they have a date with Destiny. Pinky makes a joke about it and says flying is fun, without the text bubble being connected to him. He insults the intelligence of birds, and it comes out of nowhere that he gets a talking pigeon offended into attacking him, with no explanation that the pigeon was genetically engineered like him. It's good that a text box says a short time of healing later. But he'd also need to repair the delicate equipment. Healing alone wouldn't fix the damaged suit. So that must have happened too. Brain says he's built into the suits a device that'll translate everything they say into bee dancing to communicate with the bees. So they're gonna try to control the swarm just by talking to them? It'd be smarter to use brainwashing on them. He can brainwash people on the show. Instead he takes a risk. A bee calls them intruders, which makes sense because they clearly don't look like the other bees, not having all of their faces covered up with a bee mask. Brain expects them to believe his lie that he's one of them, as they wonder why these supposedly normal bees have spears and mustaches. Clearly they're genetically engineered too. Why did the scientists think they had anything to gain from that? Pinky's suit makes him say stupid things because he damaged it when he dropped it. But if it's because it's damaged, why would it even form complete, understandable sentences? Brain wisely says to let him do the talking. A bee is surprisingly smart and merciful, saying that they could join the swarm if they offered it tons of honey later. Pinky talks for no reason and gets called out on it by Brain and apologizes. Brain flies to a honey factory and tells the manager that he's from NBC and came here to pick up a truckload of honey ordered for a humorous sketch on Saturday Night Live. He'd be confused because he wasn't told about this order and they don't have a truck. The CEO doesn't recognize them somehow. This would only make sense if this was his first world domination plan. Brain tells him who he is and he laughs, calling them comedians. So we see a driver drive away with the honey as they proved they were funny enough to have a comedy sketch after all. Never mind that Brain being what he says he is would be the only explanation for why he's so short and can talk. With some reluctance, the driver eventually dumps the honey on the street. I hate how the text from the bees is harder to understand because it's blurry. Brain wants to become their leader and gets told they have a queen, who's talking like Pinky for no reason in a failed attempt at humor. He decides to make Pinky pose as the queen as a challenger to the throne, despite the way he looks. They compete in a montage of games that fortunately stick to one panel, and Pinky wins. He sits on a throne, and Brain says Pinky's translator has been fixed, and he needs to give the command to attack. He wastes time telling Pinky not to get carried away afterwards. Brain had some congressmen threatened into admitting defeat. It's forced that one of them says they've got me, babe. What a cringe-worthy line. There's no reason Brain would waste time overseeing the building of a monument to him before he's even done. Instead he has the townspeople paint a portrait of him, and they hover there, which is why it gets to the point where Pinky asks for some food that bees wouldn't want, causing Brain to hit him for what he said, which gets the bees mad at him for hitting the queen. Pinky apologizes and says that his translator's on the fritz again. Brain thinks Pinky would understand his big words when he could have easily phrased it better than that. He wants them to tell them to canvass the land between here and their next objective. Since when does anyone, even he, say canvass the land? So Pinky doesn't really know what he means, and says, fly to big canvas and land. He convinces the bees to fly into the wet paint and get stuck, ruining the plan. It could have easily been ruined because the bees turned on him for hitting Pinky. So I wish that was why it was ruined, because that makes sense and finally be karma for his bad habit. Pinky and the Brain, issue 15. After some narration annoys me by lying that this is a real story for no reason, and a whole page is wasted, we see Pinky comment on Mount Rushmore in the Acme Learning Mobile. They're conveniently put in. Still trapped in a cage. Why does Pinky say, we are taking the kids to see the monuments? It's the bus driver and the teacher who's doing that. You wouldn't expect lab mice to be with a bunch of school kids. After the kids leave, Brain reveals his plan to Pinky. If he fills a large structure made of corn with carbon monoxide and bakes it just right, he'd create a new powerful and efficient source of energy the likes of which the world has never seen. People already know how to use corn as biofuel, and why does he say "like of which"? So he's underestimating human intelligence if he assumes they aren't already using corn this way. Or maybe they weren't yet. It was a 90s comic. His entire plan rides on the fact that he'd be the sole owner of the patent and become the richest man ever. Why does he say owners and not owner? 2 typos in 1 page, wow. In universe, I guess he misspoke from trying to talk too fast with little sleep. Pinky asks him where he'd find a structure of corn, and shows self-awareness by calling himself dumb. Brain reveals that there's a corn palace with corn murals. Well, that's convenient for them. I hope there is one in real life, or else that'd just be unrealistic. A complete waste of corn. He wants to fill the palace with gas, wrap the palace with a tin foil he'll get from a giant Guinness record book contending ball, and tie the thing up with the world's biggest ball of twine. Pinky says he'll bring 3 tourist attractions to one place like it's a good thing, when it's only good for the tourists. Well, of course, it's a bad thing for the countries whose tourist attractions would be stolen from. I guess he doesn't have the money to buy enough twine and tinfoil, or make it. Even though he's somehow allowed to do anything a human could do. So you'd think he'd just auction off an invention to get the money. Why doesn't he just become the richest man with his inventions? He also doesn't have the patience to buy enough twine and tinfoil, because it'd take forever. And he might not be aware that his best inventions would make him richer than this plan, because he's so used to hoarding them for himself, not thinking about letting anyone else have them. Since he's well-intentioned, that means he's sort of responsible and smart. So it's likely that Brain thinks the bad consequences of the wrong person using his inventions wouldn't be worth auctioning them off, and might backfire on him before he could become the ruler and get them back. I wish he explained that. Not to mention the fact that he could always steal a credit card of one of the people working at the lab, so he technically doesn't need to try to make money for his schemes of world domination. So I assume that the reason he does those schemes anyways is that he's morally opposed to doing that. Naturally, Pinky asks Brain how he's going to get that much carbon monoxide. Then a smell causes them to assume there's a fire and run out of the bus. And notice some biker girls on motorcycles that cause a ridiculous amount of pollution, to the point where you'd think they wouldn't put up with it. It looks like the blonde one is pretty, but the rest are drawn as ugly just because they're doing a guy thing. So while it's interesting that they're girl bikers, it's not that progressive. They drive off getting them hurt, and Pinky guesses that Brain wants to infiltrate and join their gang in a bad disguise and convince the bikers to hold a meeting inside the corn palace. Brain has an out-of-character moment because he just wanted to call the police, even though the bikers didn't do anything that would justify that. It's legal to pollute with motorcycles, and they don't drive around specifically to pollute the air, and they didn't know they hurt them. And I don't think it's illegal to hurt mice. Brain says he likes Pinky's idea better. It looks like when Pinky had just gotten hurt, he's not in a condition where he's gone off on a long train of thought about something irrelevant. Instead, the pain made him pay attention to reality. So of course he thought to use the very same carbon monoxide that bothered him for Brain's carbon monoxide plan. The only thing confusing is that Brain didn't think of this. Pinky's honored, and then asks what his idea was again because his short-term memory sucks. Brain wants to get some biker clothing, and somehow they're going to go to a store. But the only way things would make sense is if they only went there to look at biker clothes for a bit and then go home to make clothes in their size. Pinky says his uncle got lost in a mall so long that when he found his way out, he was a great-grandfather. Don't mice live for a very small amount of time? They walk past toys in a toy aisle, and Brain holds a toy with biker clothes. I've never heard of any dolls with biker clothes. Brain says there's one last thing to do, and we see a sign above a door saying pens, needles, and some people scream behind it. And somehow, there's some humans that are dressed up in mouse costumes that obviously need to be a lot bigger than Brain and Pinky to fit them. They get dolls for their clothes. Why were there any people shouting? Oh, they must have screamed because they gave themselves piercings, and Pinky got a tattoo, without any tattoo equipment. but that doesn't explain why they found mouse costumes and put them on the dolls when that'd obviously be a waste of time, since the human faces were still visible. It's also a waste of time to give one of them a dangerous chemical vial. This page made so little sense that I went to the previous panel and back a few times trying to make sense of it. I wish I was shown what was happening behind that door. Also, it never made any sense that Brain and Pinky thought they'd be accepted into the gang anyways because they're so small, so they could never ride their own motorcycle or be useful for biker activities in general. More importantly, and they're guys when this is an all-girls biker gang. The only way the plot could progress is with bad writing. Somehow a biker calls an obvious talking mouse young and studly, and the other one wolf whistles. Somehow, Brain talks like an idiot to the leader of the gang instead of simply asking to join her. Just to imitate a movie, I guess. Making no indication of what he wants. Why didn't she succumb to his charm if the others did? He gets hit away for being rude, and he bounces off one of them. Pinky asks the leader if they're looking for some dudes to hang with. She calls him cute, and somehow agrees, even though it's obvious that little mice wouldn't be able to hack it with them. Meanwhile, the fat biker somehow calls Brain a new boyfriend, even though he's clearly a small mouse and wants to keep him. And Brain somehow thinks he's gone blind permanently. Then the other female bikers show up from outside, and somehow one of them asks how the others always get the dudes. As if they're somehow attracted to talking mice. Also, they should know that the reason Sadie and Bertha always get the dudes is that they're the best looking. Why is Bertha even mentioned? This is obviously trying to be funny, but it's just failing miserably and coming off as sexist where the girls are boy crazy enough to want Pinky and Brain because the joke is that they're so boy crazy that they'd even want someone ugly. You don't see male bikers being portrayed as so girl crazy that they want ugly girls. Pinky's kinda cute, so I'm thinking that he'd be a cute pet mascot could work. But again, it'd only be written because they're girls. And it crosses the line because most of the time they're just portrayed as being attracted to them. I'd rather the story make sense than have rule of funny be its only excuse for plot progression. When the story is just being confusing. The gang starts fighting, and minutes later, thankfully their leader asks Pinky what she could do to make it up to him, and even kisses his cheek. Though he's too sore to appreciate it. Brain reminds Pinky that he's missing an opportunity, and thankfully this time the writer thought to indicate that he's whispering to him, even if in a way that's confusing at first, because I never saw it done like that. But it's good that it saves us the waste of time reading it. Pinky asks if they've ever been to Fargo, and that convinces the gang to head there. Brain gets sat on by the big one riding the motorcycle, and you'd think she'd feel that and instantly stomp. And Pinky's holding on to the pretty one, and I don't know how the artist got away with that. So this explains how they can stay with them when they can't ride motorcycles and Brain was too impatient to take the time to make little motorcycles. Still, why didn't any of them keep the mice in their pockets? That'd be nicer. The narration's annoying nonsense. We see one of them ride too close to some old people playing chess to knock their board over, and one of them bullies Porky while he's watering his flowers. This just reinforces a harmful stereotype that all bikers are criminals for some reason. The bikers stop at a rental place to look for the big ball of tinfoil. Then someone shows up looking for a big criminal guy that used to ride with the gang. So apparently it isn't just an all-girls club, which explains better why they let Pinky and the Brain join. He's Sadie's ex, who got kicked out of the gang and was spotted in the area. Who would name their kid Studs McKnuckles? Must be a nickname. Brain gets annoyed with her wasting his time, and she insults his looks as a result. There's a pointless pair of panels where she feels nauseous from morning sickness, and then the gang leaves on motorcycles. And she says she can't believe they're fleeing the interview, even though she was given all of the information. She was told that the guy she's looking for isn't with them anymore. Brain complains that they don't have time to get entangled in a local police matter. Why does he say that? They have all the time in the world. He should just say he doesn't feel like it, he's impatient. And even if he wanted to, they wouldn't let him. Sadie says she's not taking any chances with her gang, and tells the rest of her friends to leave and meet them at the Corn Palace. Then they're told by a German that they can't get close to the giant ball, and have to stay on the side of the fence. Brain's dialogue in front of him makes it clear that he wants to get that ball. and would have every reason to think he couldn't get it. Then Sadie says in front of him that Bertha will distract the German while she'll drive the trailer under the tinfoil. But he'd hear that and react. At least Bertha shows compassion for Brain, apologizing and asking if he's okay. And then the stereotypically evil biker Studs shows up, and wastes a bunch of time talking to Sadie. He says that the female bikers told him she's helping to take over the world, and he wants to help. I guess Sadie's too scared to simply tell him to leave, because she lets him have his hand on her shoulder. He tells the others to walk through the field and make sure the coast is clear before they'd meet them at the ball. Brain says that something about the situation is just not right. Yeah, duh, it's the fact that he joined them when he was broken up with earlier. Pinky complains that the German at the coffee shop was saying minefield a lot. And then somehow I'm supposed to believe that minefields didn't destroy them, and merely sent them flying upwards with barely any injuries, repeatedly. Even the OSDH wouldn't write this. I don't see why it was necessary to have this happen. It's nice of Pinky to carry Brain and ask if he's okay. They make it to the tinfoil ball. Pinky had no reason to lick it. Because it's a frozen metallic object, he sticks to it. I know he has his tongue out a lot because he's crazy and his tongue's too large, but still, this happened because he went too close to it, when he didn't have to. Then Brain gets pushed into the ball and gets stuck to it by the tongue as well, even though he'd have no reason to stick his tongue out that much too. At least the biker thanks them for clearing the minefield. While he looks like a jerk for pushing them over to it and rolling it, this would make sense if he was just trying to punish them for wanting to take over the world, which he blatantly knows about. It's a good thing the next panel was drawn in a way that reveals that the ball bounced down the hill, so maybe they never went under it. The ball lands in a wagon that gets pulled by the force of a single driving motorcycle. It must not be that heavy. Good thing it's not that big. They head for the biggest ball of twine and see a closed sign. Brain comes up with a plan that'll take advantage of it being made of twine. Pinky compliments it, and even Sud says, not bad. Even if he uses an insulting term for him that would make more sense to be used against a human, not an obvious mouse. Brain wants to make him eat those words and puts a part of the twine through the other end of the room. He says that once the ball unwinds, they'll make sure it stays tangle-free. Somehow Pinky can simply run up to the top of the ball. I guess the motion blur hides the fact that he actually did some climbing, and he climbed at super speed. Either he has super speed naturally as a part of being genetically engineered, or Brain did it. They admit they're having fun as they wonder if being on the ball would backfire on them. The ball of twine speeds up because of Stud speeding up with the motorcycle out of impatience, and Sadie has the good sense to wonder if he's going too fast for them. Brain tells Pinky to run for his life and hope the thing would slow down before they'd run out of twine. I assume this is to get back at Sadie for breaking up with him. Eventually it turns out Sadie and Bertha got tied up by the giant ball of twine, and the biker acts like he did it on purpose and grabs Pinky and Brain. He says that since he got the twine and tinfoil, he wants to go to the Corn Palace and follow his plan to take over the world himself. This is why Brain should have told his minions his entire plan. It makes sense that he's really used to telling Pinky the whole plan, so this was force of habit. But I'd expect him to keep the bikers on a need-to-know basis. It's hard to buy that a biker would want to run the world. That's a lot of paperwork and stuff. He says he spotted a wood chipper out back. Why is it there? It's way to Brain to tell Pinky that it's been nice knowing him and tell him goodbye. Then the woman with morning sickness from earlier shows up with a gun to arrest him. She sure needed that hat with a symbol on it. She never looked like a cop. The only way it makes sense for her to tell him that he looks like a nice fella and it's a real shame is if she was being sarcastic, because he's ugly. She already knew he was a wanted man, so she wouldn't be surprised. I'm surprised the biker didn't foil Brain's plan. Sadie tells Pinky and Brain, way to go! And it cuts to the bikers and them at the Corn Palace, with the janitor telling them that they can decorate the outside of the building any way they want. How's that allowed? Maybe it isn't, and he doesn't care because he's just the janitor and couldn't stop them anyways. He says he doesn't have time to fix the busted thermostat. Brain says it doesn't matter because it's a hot day. Pinky says, poor Brain works so hard, it would be a shame if he failed again. But I don't like the expression he has. He wants Sadie to do him a favor. Gee, I wonder if he'll ruin his plan this way. He's done that so many times already. Brain tells everyone there to grab a piece of tinfoil and start rapping. Sadie grabs the janitor wanting to talk to him. We see the entire building covered in tinfoil and ropes. Brain says the air holes will allow them to still breathe properly as the room would fill up with CO2, but they'd still be standing in a bunch of CO2 gas. Pinky says that he made sure the handyman would fix the thermostat and turn the heat all the way up. It does make sense that he'd do this because he'd assume that more heat would just mean that Brain's plan would work faster. And while that clearly wasn't necessary, so many plans failed that it makes sense that he'd feel like the plan would fail any second. And so he has to hurry. Why did they think they needed to stand in the corn palace? The palace gets too hot, and a bunch of popping sounds happen. The chemical reaction happens too fast, and the building explodes into popcorn. But does the popcorn part make sense? Obviously, if we could be in a microwave, it'd be lethal. We have so much water in us. So I'm pretty sure a thermostat doesn't warm things up in the exact same way as a microwave. Also, there's no reason Brain would call the planet corny. The first story by Sean McLaughlin was about Brain getting hired by Shakespeare to play the part of a king wannabe in a play because he sees that he's perfect for the part. It was impossibly stupid of him to think he could convince the audience to want him as their ruler at all, especially with the queen in the audience. Shakespeare's dialogue was so boring and tested my patience. The story didn't have enough good material to justify its length. It was good to see the audience get entertained by the unintended slapstick in the play though, but it was tedious until that point. The second story by Jesse McCann was about Brain and Pinky infiltrating a swarm of sentient bees in bee suits. They must be genetically engineered. And Pinky becomes their queen by beating the queen in competitions. For absolutely no reason, Brain wastes time having a portrait of himself made before he's done taking over the world. Normally he's extremely impatient to take over the world. He wouldn't waste time on this first when he isn't even halfway done intimidating everyone important with bees. He's never wasted time trying to have monuments built in the climax of achieving his plans before. So there's no excuse for him being where he is when Pinky's translator screws up and tells the bees to get themselves stuck to wet paint. Some of the panels at the end of the story should have been removed. It would have made sense that the plan failed if the bees decided to try to kill Brain for hitting Pinky. Somehow they let Brain try to tell Pinky what to order them to do, instead of interrupting him by attacking him. The whole time I wondered why Brain didn't use mass brainwashing on the bees. Because he can brainwash people in the show. I guess he just can't do that to bees for some reason. More importantly, a constant problem in the story was that the text for the bees was needlessly harder to read. This issue by Jesse Leon McCann was about Brain wanting to steal giant objects to warm up corn murals for fuel. And somehow getting accepted into a group of female bikers. And it's mostly because they're somehow attracted to them, talking about them as if they're handsome guys. When it could have made sense because the pretty one calls Pinky cute. So they could have just thought of them as cute pets. Also, they're knowingly trying to help him take over the world, which I assume is because they assume they'll get rewarded afterwards. So that makes sense. So that alone would have worked as an excuse for them to let them join them despite their small size. Because Brain's plan is the usefulness he's offering them. I never liked that the bikers were portrayed as being fine with bullying random people, but that's just one page. When Sadie's Evil X was introduced, I thought it could have easily not come up as a problem for Brain since he had no foreshadowing, and I thought this was an all-girls group. So it would have been frustrating if he ruined Brain's plan. Instead he gets arrested after just boasting, so what he did didn't matter. But then Pinky ruins the plan by having the building get warmed up too much until it explodes into popcorn, as if a thermostat is a microwave. But Brain said that it doesn't matter that the thermostat isn't working. And nothing ever implied that they were on a very strict time limit. So while I get why you'd think all he'd do with this is make the plan succeed faster, there was no hurry, so he could have easily not done this by doing something without permission. But at least I can see the logic behind why he made his mistake this time. So this is one of the better times. It just gets tiresome that Pinky is the one who ruins his plans so much despite being his loyal sidekick. But since they caused trouble by stealing tourist attractions and getting the bikers hurt and ruining someone's life getting him arrested, the plan failing was karma.